our first kind of thesis, I suppose, of the episode is about doing, action. Because I think above all else, Hemingway was a doer.
Mm-hmm.
He liked to go places, do things, see things. And I had a quote from him this time. I didn't just imitate him, that I think is a good intro to such a discussion. It's not from a story. He wrote it as part of the preface to a short story collection called The First 49. It was a collection published of the first 49 short stories he wrote. And in it, he wrote, "In going where you have to go and doing what you have to do and seeing what you have to see, you dull and blunt the instrument you write with. But I would rather have it bent and dull and know I had to put it on the grindstone again and hammer it into shape and put a whetstone to it and know that I had something to write about, than to have it bright and shining and nothing to say, or smooth and well-oiled in the closet, but unused."
Wow, I really like that.
Me too.
Because as two people who are gearing up for some travels in the future, it is hard to think about traveling because there's a lot of sacrifices that you have to make. You can't bring your shiny things with you. You can't, like, you're pretty much just your own brain and body. And then the benefit of it is that you'll then be inspired, as he's saying. Like, it's going to be tough on you, and especially in his life, it was physically tough on him, emotionally. And this came out in his writing as incredible stories. But yeah, the actual vessel of his own body and his own, like, life had to keep being rebuilt.
Yeah, that's well said. I mean, it's also relevant because we're both, I suppose, aspiring creative people, or I guess most people are. But whatever your form of expression, I like to write, you like to sew, and we do various other things as well. Sometimes you feel this malaise, and you and I have been talking ourselves a lot about this recently, where, for instance, I want to write a big project. Like, I've been feeling like I want to write a novel or something. But then you get this kind of second guessing about, but what am I going to write about? And you feel like your life experience maybe hasn't caught up to your artistic ambition. So there's a sense of like, you need to experience some things to be able to write truthfully about big themes. And he, from what I can tell, almost exclusively wrote about big things, war and death and love and, addiction and travel. And like, he was writing they were very kind of personal stories, but they were touching on really universal themes. And I think when someone tries to write about those things without having any real exposure to it outside of, let's say, books about those things or movies about those things, which is what most of us have today. Like, we've never been on battlefield, but, a lot of people have seen Saving Private Ryan. It rings of inauthenticity, kind of.
For sure. Hemingway famously was quite the exaggerator when it comes to his biography.
Oh, yeah.
So a lot of the facts that we know about him could be highly inaccurate, like calling himself a war hero and stuff. And it's like, perhaps these things didn't happen, but there's not a ton of proof. I just think it's funny. But at least he had something to go off of. Because we couldn't write these stories that were pretty convincing about being in battle just based off of Saving Private Ryan. Like, there was some truth to it, sort of.
Yeah, I think there was this delightful kind of gray area between autobiography and complete fiction that permeates a lot of his works, which kind of makes it fun and feeds into that mythologizing of one's own self, which is this kind of, you're trying to make yourself this larger than life figure, which maybe was a little bit easier pre-internet for one thing, but also I can see why a lot of people think that's this kind of really grandiose and maybe distinctly American kind of arrogance about oneself.
For sure.
But I think it's just fun.
Yeah, similarly to the Shakespeare episode we did last week, I'm going to try and pace myself because I am the Hemingway fiend in this household, so even already I'm trying to stop myself from like blurting out a bunch of facts and ideas and stuff.
But in keeping with the doing and especially the relationship between one's experiences and one's art, I really think that's our first lesson that we can draw directly to the Solacene. I'm also reminded of another quote by another artist, Hayao Miyazaki, who kind of co-founded Studio Ghibli and directed a lot of their classic films, who may or may not appear later in this semester as well, where he was kind of denouncing the state of modern anime. And he said most modern anime directors and artists and writers are working based off of other anime, whereas we work based off of real life. And I really think this is a key thing that's feeding into, there's a lot of factors, but for instance, like the increasing stylized nature and kind of self-referential or meta nature of a lot of, let's say, big movies that we see today is because the people involved in them don't have life experiences outside of the cinema. And I don't think that every wannabe artist needs to be all the time traveling and putting themselves in literal danger, as was Hemingway. But I think we need to embody more of this go-getter spirit. I think it's a spectrum. I think on the one end, you have Hemingway, who most of his writing was kind of almost like journalistic. Even if it was fictionalized, it was very heavily taken by what he would see day by day, I think. And on the other end, you have, we don't know much about him, but you can imagine someone like Shakespeare being a lot more studious. You know, a lot of his stories did come from Ovid's Metamorphoses and other pre-existing sources. They were obviously shaped by things that he observed as well, so he wasn't completely battening himself down in a library and just studying. But I think that we need to be more aware of this balance between study and living.
And even that was a good example, because Shakespeare very clearly studied the Metamorphoses, different languages, religion, all of these things. But today we can even lean in towards barely studying them, just passively enjoying and absorbing stuff. And I think there's a difference between that and what Shakespeare was doing and what some other historically great artists have done, of being really immersed in the industry. Like Tarantino has watched tens of thousands of films in his life, but he wasn't just sitting down at 10 p.m. and like popping one on. It was intentional, mentally taking notes, rewatching, looking into the industry, these types of things. And Tarantino, as an example, probably didn't have a ton of experience with the things he was making movies about. Like, he didn't live in 70s Hollywood. He didn't live during World War II, but by studying other films and these histories, he was able to put forth really lovely stories. Yeah,
it's a good point. I just think too many of us veer towards that today. I think it's best when we have a variety of types of people.
For sure.
Types of characters. Where are the characters today? That's what I want to know.
Where are the characters?
Where's the person who walks into the gas station and we immediately know there's Ernest?